Hey everyone, Ryan here at Plague Scythe Studios. Today, I'm discussing guitar gear that doesn't even exist yet, at least not in this corporeal dimension, because this is my top 5 guitar-related products that I would like to see made. Some of this is going to be slight tweaks on concepts or even mass-manufactured products that already exist today, and just kind of perfected or add in a couple quality of life features to make it the best it could be, in my opinion. And others are going to be completely batshit crazy and too expensive or bulky or ridiculous to ever sell to a general audience. And so for a lot of this, I completely understand why it doesn't exist or why no one's really attempted these kind of things. Or we've already solved this kind of problem with other means. I'm going to be kind of hounding on that point a lot. But nonetheless, this is the kind of stuff that I would be excited to see. And a lot of this I would definitely buy if it were out there. So here's my wish list. Let's start with what I believe to be the most practical product on this list, and it's probably the easiest to bring to market since a lot of the legwork has already been done. I want more modeling cabinets. What does that mean? Well, most of us probably know about amp modeling, right? It's a digital recreation of an analog amplifier circuit, whether we're talking about fractal audio stuff, Line 6, Kemper, on the VST plugin side of things, budget micro preamp pedals, whatever it might be. But when we talk about that kind of stuff, especially for the direct recording route, most of the time what we're hearing is a recorded guitar sound because we pair those things with impulse responses, which not only captures the sonic signature of the cabinet, but also the microphone and the microphone position. So you're not just hearing a straight up in the room guitar sound most of the time with these amp modelers, which is what a lot of people don't like about them. Now, there's a few ways to rectify that situation for those that want an in-the-room amp sound with an amp modeler, and there's plenty of reasons you might want to do that, whether you're just jamming at home or you need some stage sound, whatever it might be. You can take a regular amp modeler, disable any cabinet emulation, run that through a power amp and through a regular, guitar cabinet, and that's all fine and good. The more common approach nowadays for a lot of players is FRFR, or full range flat response, where you keep the cabinet modeling enabled on your amp modeler, then you send that direct signal to the FRFR speaker. And it kind of tries to act like an in-between version. Yes, you're not hearing a perfect in-the-room guitar cab sound because it still has an IR baked in it, but it's also not perfectly FRFR like the studio monitors would be or a PA system would be. It still has kind of a meaty guitar cab characteristic to it. So it kind of sits somewhere in between. And it's a cool thing for some players, but a lot of players still don't like listening to that because it's not either one of those things in a lot of instances. So this is where a product like the Line 6 Power Cab comes into play. And this is a product I absolutely love in terms of its concept. And it's something that, I kid you not, I kind of brainstormed and listed out this product spec for something just like this within a month of it getting announced. And then they bring it out and I'm like, okay, thank God I don't have to hit up a manufacturer about this kind of thing. Not that I'd have the funds to make it happen, but with all this stuff, I just would like to see these products out there. The Line 6 Power Cab is essentially an in-the-room cabinet modeler, which is more or less what I want. It kind of has a blank slate speaker that's not FRFR. It's more intended for the guitar sound, but then you can enable these different profiles that emulate the characteristics of a greenback, or Creamback, or V30, Celestian Blue, a lot of these common ones that most of us are chasing. And so not only can you send a direct signal to front of house from your Line 6 or whatever modeler you're using, but then you send a signal without cabinet emulation to those, and ta-da, you have an in-the-room kind of sound with different speakers. And, in theory, between different presets and all this kind of stuff, you could change, depending on what amp you're using, these speaker models. So, if you switch from a dual rec patch with V30s, you could go to a plexi patch with, on-stage greenback sounds. And I absolutely love that. I believe they also have manual switches if you want to just kind of keep it at one setting for an entire playthrough. You could do that. I think the magic really is being able to switch it in real time, though. I believe Kemper is also coming out with a Kemper cab that does something similar. And all this stuff is self-powered, which would kind of eliminate the need for an external power amp, which would be awesome. So the concepts are already there. What I want is basically meld that with a couple more bells and whistles and make it look more like a traditional guitar cab. First of all, I would love vertical 212s because I think those are like the best compromise between lugging a huge 4x12 around and still getting the 412 sound. Just even splitting it in half, you still get that vertical dissonance that makes the sound of a 4x12 to me. And I would also love if you could kind of smush them together to get a mono 412 sound if you wanted, or keep them stereo. That's personally what I would like to hear. But what I really want out of this is the ability to mix and match speakers within one box. So let's say I wanted to mix V30s and T75s, or even V30s and greenbacks, and I wanted like an X configuration in stereo. The ability to assign different speakers, different models would be absolutely killer. And of course, have MIDI functionality to change each one as well. The real kicker for me, though, would be the ability to enable and disable speakers, because let's face it, a lot of the times when we think of an amp tone, whether it be the full stack of a Marshall JCM 800 or like a Fender Blues Deluxe combo, it comes down to the amount of speakers and the type of speakers used. And so if you could have say Matrix made this product, or even Fractal Audio got involved, I would personally like if Celestion still made the speakers and kind of, worked on the cabinet side of things. One of those amp modelers plugged in, and you could enable one speaker at a time, where you could change from a 412 recto sound to a horizontal 212, like Vox sound, to a 1x12, or especially if they could emulate a 1x10 or even 1x8 tone with a 12 or 15-inch speaker, that would be killer. I don't know how they would do that, but if they could figure it out through just EQ and dynamics and all that kind of stuff, that's a day one buy for me. In fact, that would obsolete a lot of gear, as if, most of my analog stuff isn't already sort of useless compared to the digital counterparts. But that is why this is number one for me on my list. A full-fledged, fully featured modeling cabinet that basically bridges the gap between a real guitar cab and FR and has none of the disadvantages of either. My next wish list item only really exists in one of two ways, and one barely counts because it's only a digital emulation. The other is basically a hack user mod that certainly wouldn't work for everyone, and that's why I'd like to see an experienced manufacturer take this concept and run with it. And it's quite simple in theory. I want to take this thing and put it on a pedal board. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, there's some problems with this, and this is admittedly one of those things that I don't think would sell that well until, again, an experienced manufacturer really nailed down the details. So this is a three-way toggle switch for my pickups, obviously. When you're playing most stuff, it's not a big deal to do that, right? Even if you have a 5 or 7-way blade switch, most of us can probably get used to that. When you start getting into push-pull pots, and especially when you have, more contemporary pickups like these Fishman Fluences that are so capable, they have 2 or 3 voicings, we have everything else pretty much nailed down to be able to switch over presets or scenes, different tones with the click of a foot switch, or even automatically through a MIDI message. But all of us guitar players are still doing this to change our pickup sound, and it's kind of baffling. For a lot of stuff, it's just not necessary. Many metal players are going to stick to the bridge the entire time, at least 95% of the time. But there are plenty of players out there too that, I could foresee you're playing 4 counts up here on the neck pickup, then you're back to 4 counts down here on the bridge. You're back up here, stuff that you probably could do flawlessly in the studio, but may be harder to translate. And so if you had this automated, or at least the ability to control it with your foot, I think it'd be way easier. Again, this concept has been realized in sort of a prototype form by many players, where they might run like a stereo Y cable out of their guitar and then run into like a mixer volume pedal or an A/B switch, that sort of thing. But what I would really like to see is kind of an all-in-one cable that goes to a box, and that box breaks out to your standard 1/4 inch in MIDI. That'd be great. Of course, that has the problem of wireless. You'd probably be tethered down at all times to do that. And if they did make a wireless system, it would be extremely expensive and proprietary, and I don't like that kind of stuff. Or they'd have to shrink all this stuff down into something that could fit in, your standard cavity, or it'd be another say Evertune situation where you'd have to drill out a larger cavity in your guitar, and I don't want that either. So That's why I say I'd really like to see an experienced manufacturer take on this problem. And again, this is a problem that I just don't think is near the top of the list for us guitar players to solve, but it's more in concept. It's kind of silly that we have everything else so easily automated and we're still up here doing this to get our different pickup tones. So in a perfect world, I would like a third-party manufacturer to kind of take the lead on this. That way it doesn't matter if you have Fishmans or EMGs or passives or actives, and you just plug and play and you're done, kind of unsolder this stuff and go about your way. But what I think would be more likely is that one of these pickup manufacturers would have their own proprietary system, which I don't love, but probably have like a little integrated circuit on their one of these pots, and then that would go out to a breakout box somewhere, like a pedal thing. And this isn't something that you would need in the studio, obviously, but if you're a touring, gigging musician, especially if you play a lot of covers, or you're just a shred monster and need to go between pickup sounds that quickly, I think it would be cool. And I think once people get used to that, it'd be one of those things where it was like, how did I ever live without it kind of thing. So I don't know. That's just me. But I think if you play to a lot of backing tracks and you're used to your, Fractal or Line 6 or Kemper switching automatically via MIDI, why not that as well? And to quickly address that first point that I kind of brushed off, yes, I know there are pickup modelers out there, whether it be onboard amp modelers or, you got different software, even, standalone pedals that kind of do that kind of thing. That's just cheating to me. Yeah, we could throw some EQ curves and maybe a compressor or something like that and get close. But if you've got the hardware, I want to use the hardware. You can make that same argument for amp modeling. It's like, yeah, why do we need 90 Plexi or Marshall derivative models in this amp modeler when all of them are fairly similar? Because we got them, so let's use it. That's one less thing that's inaccurate. So I say if you can automate it, do the real deal. Concept number 3 also revolves around MIDI automated analog circuit paths and is arguably a better product idea than my last one. The issue is it's about 25 years too late to be relevant. But either way, I want something that is rather simple on the surface, and that is a best of overdrive pedal in a 1U rack format. Sounds redundant, but hear me out. We've got all these 1 to 2U rack preamps that everyone loves, whether it be from Marshall or Engel or Mesa Boogie, especially something like the Triaxis. And I basically want a Triaxis treatment for like a tube screamer, parametric EQ, hard clipping pedal, maybe even a fuzz circuit all in one. So something like the Mesa Boogie Triaxis, we're still talking an analog preamp, and all this stuff is MIDI automated. It has push buttons on the front instead of, your dials. You get to switch between, 7 or 8 different channels, something like that. And it's got presets. So, it just basically flips between all that kind of stuff, and you've still got an all tube kind of thing. But it always baffled me that when people wanted to overdrive rack mounted preamps, you still had to use pedals. We certainly have gear to help solve that problem. I mean, you can put in a slide out drawer and loop switchers, that sort of thing. And if there's like a one-off pedal, then that's pretty much the way you have to use it. But whatever you set that pedal at, that's what you get. It's either on or off. There's no MIDI switching, nothing like that, unless it has it on board, talking strictly analog pedals here. So I always thought that, pedals and amplifier heads or even combos, they kind of go together like peanut butter and jelly in my mind. If I'm going to use a rack system, I want to go full-blown rack. No messing with all these, loops and extra cables. I just want to slot in something, put a, one cable to the next and be done. So that's where I think something like this could have really been cool. Again, 2 or 3 decades ago. Now there's certainly rack overdrives. You got like the Tube Butler. You've got stuff like the micro modules from Boss that were like half racks, but those are, again, on or off. Wherever you set them at, you're done. So I guess it's just always kind of baffled me that so many rack products out there aim for different preamp tones with no regard to the pedal side of things, because I would say at least a healthy plurality, if not a majority of guitar players out there, use some kind of pedal at some point for their tone, ranging from country and blues to contemporary metal. It doesn't matter. So I don't know why, I guess, all these amp manufacturers think they don't need a pedal circuit, to boost their stuff. Obviously, the stuff like the Triaxis, you can get by most of the time without one. But if there's no clipping diode circuit in there, you're not getting the Tube Screamer sound. If there's no diodes going to ground in a hard clipping circuit, you're not going to get the MXR Distortion Plus tone, or especially like anything like a Klon Centaur, especially not a fuzz. So I don't know why, aside from probably some custom jobs that you guys could tell me about, that hasn't been made. And the problem with this concept has more to do with timing than the concept itself. Again, if I was going to build a rack system today, Helix, Kemper, or Axe-Fx, that's it. You're done. That has all your pedals. Depending on which platform you go for, it has basically all the effects you'd ever need. And you don't need to worry about MIDI automated analog signal paths. It's just all there. You can change anything with a preset. A lot of stuff, even within one preset using scenes, it just doesn't matter. You have every pedal and amp combination under the sun. And so it's no wonder that no one's making that kind of stuff nowadays. You don't hear a lot of people, using analog rack preamps anyway. So it's kind of a dead idea, which is unfortunate because, part of me has that retro bug to build something out like that. But part of me also is glad that it doesn't exist, because that is one more reason to veer away from that side of guitar gear. But it's a missed opportunity, I think. I think it would be very easy to fit 4 or 5 pedal circuits into a 1U enclosure, at least considering what they've been able to do with preamps. And, that's all you pretty much need. Stack them as you wish and change parameters per preset. I would have bought that. These last couple of concepts veer into, shall we say, unrealistic territory, where I cannot see manufacturers making a lot of money on this or be willing to spend a lot of R&D, because it solved quite a few problems but for a relatively small audience. So I wouldn't expect to see this kind of stuff out anytime soon, but some of this could just be a slight upgrade over some existing gear and maybe get most of the way there for what I'm looking at. Concept number 4 then is something I would call the Tube Amp Control Center. And for all intents and purposes, this is something I've been putting together myself for the past year. And it's changed its whole approach since I first shown off kind of my beta version of it. And that was a while ago at this point. But in essence, I basically want a patch bay that you plug in and out. You've got a guitar in, you've got a DI in that shares the same signal path. If you want to reamp from your PC, you got a tuner. You've got stuff like a noise gate, buffer if you want it, maybe even pre-post EQ, the ability to run a pedal board in front and in the effects loop of that amp. Maybe you could share the effects loop. Maybe you could even put it after the amplifier, because I would want something with like a reactive load, maybe an attenuator, maybe a power amp out if you want to increase the volume of a small amp or decrease the volume of a large amp. Maybe even an amp switch. That way you could run 3 or 4 amps in parallel and choose which one you want to use, that kind of stuff. And probably before I was halfway done with that spiel, most of you were like, I'm out. This is going to cost way too much. And you're probably right, which is why I think this will never exist. But in essence, what I really want is a Boss Waza tube expander with more I/O and basically a pre-section. Because as it stands, the tube expander is an absolute beast piece of gear. It is the only reactive load out there that not only has not only 2 different reactive loads, but 4 different reactive loads or resonant loads for both the high and low frequency. So I guess you got 16 combinations there. So you can simulate the impedance of basically any speaker out there, or at least get really close, on top of IR loading, on top of stereo effects, reverb, EQ, gates, that kind of stuff. But it does have some limitations in terms of the power amp is mono, can only handle up to a certain amount of wattage. It doesn't do pre-effects, which is a big bummer to me. I would love to be able to plug into that thing, and then you could have like maybe an effects loop before and after the amplifier. And a real standout feature would be to include maybe a 2 or 3 amp head switch, something like the KHE or Delisle, or something like an Ampete, where you put them on a safe load if you're not using it, but you have the ability to change between multiple amp heads at the same time. You could definitely integrate one of those. But if you could get the size down and make it an all-in-one unit, I'm always for that. The real issue with this, by the time you start putting in all these digital pre and post effects, and you're switching between all these amps, and this thing's going to be a colossal unit, costs so much, probably have to, replace an amp head just to make room for it. Then again, it's like, why not just go digital at that point? You're not saving a whole lot of anything. Obviously, the days of being able to crank tube amplifiers into a 412 and run a microphone to a mixing console is basically over for a vast majority of guitar players. And so we have to do something to tame these beasts if you like tube amplifiers. But at least this rig that I'm kind of putting together here is all analog until the very last stage when it gets to my PC. And there's something about that I do enjoy, even if it doesn't really matter. Minus the DI part, of course. But once you start getting to all that, then it's like, why not just throw that money in an amp modeler? It's not going to sound that different. So I guess that is really my conceptual hang up with it, even though it would make my life a hell of a lot easier for the kind of stuff I do. Either way, I think it would be nice to see someone do basically a 4-cable method reactive load DI recording rig for most amplifier heads, because as much as the 2-note stuff and the SUR stuff and even Fractal X load is cool, having that always off to the side is just, I don't know, it induces my OCD a little bit. So take that concept and run with it. If you're a Boss or a Line 6 or a Fractal, I'd like to see what you can do. Finally, the concept that would no doubt get me kicked out of any episode of Shark Tank, an idea that I'm calling pedal blocks, not to be confused with Mega Blocks, of course, though it does share some of its baseline ideas. And this is a problem that, this is the most first world of first world problems. It would only be useful for idiots like me and stores, more or less, that demo a lot of guitar pedals, because I want to take all the advantages of an amp modeler or even multi-effects unit where you can, rearrange the order of pedals or even run them in parallel, that kind of thing, without having to change anything. It's like, a couple clicks on most amp modeling software. I want to do that with analog pedals. And you hear that at first and it's like, that might be doable. But then once you start thinking about the logistics of it, you got to power all these pedals, right? You got to have I/O for all these pedals. And then you have to make this system to where it works and there's no reliability issues. So there's one of two things you could really do, I suppose. First things first, you could have an all digital signal path, basically like a digital loop switcher, where you run, say, we'll make this easy, 3 pedals. You got a tube screamer type, you got like a regular distortion pedal, and maybe a chorus pedal. And so those run into 3 loops, but the loops aren't necessarily fixed in the signal chain. So then you move one after the other and you can kind of flip-flop them around. And that's, not bad to start off with. A couple problems with that. Number one, you're introducing a digital signal path in there, which should be fine if the audio conversion, all that's fine. But a lot of people are going to have a problem with that, and I kind of get it. But number two, you're still assuming all this stuff is going in front of the amp, and I wouldn't necessarily want that. So you'd have to have like another system where you could set that into the effects loop or not. Not to mention, in order to actually make that change, you're still going to be menu diving. You're not really gaining much over, digital modeler. Maybe you could do something like click a couple switches at the same time and then they'll rotate their places. But that doesn't really solve a whole lot. So I guess what I'd like to see is something that I know is absolutely ridiculous, but I would have a blast with this. So maybe you have a few different signal paths. Maybe you got like, say, boards yay wide, yay thick. And they've got like a couple strips. One of them is like your actual audio signal path. One of them is power. And then you got different size blocks for every kind of pedal. You got one that'll fit, little guys like Moores. You got your regular Boss size. You've got, your larger pedals. And you basically secure your pedals into these blocks. And then they've got their own little cables you plug into it. It's got your power. And then those snap onto a grid on that board I mentioned. And then you just pick them up and place them down anywhere you want from right to left. And depending on the order, that's how the pedals go. How do you actually make that work? I don't know. I don't know that it's possible. This is probably a complete pipe dream. Number one, you have to assume that all those cables are going to reach. Number two, you have to assume that all your pedals are running on 9 volts, because as soon as you throw in AC or even 12, 18 volts, you got to make a change somewhere. That throws out a bunch of pedals. You got to make sure you've got all these sizes that somehow fit all of these pedal sizes. And by the time you throw all this crap on a board, there's no telling how much space you've lost versus if you've just done a perfect, pedal cabling job to begin with. But if by some miracle someone figured out how to make this work, just imagine going to your local guitar store and being able to test pedals and saying, I want to hear what this sounds like in front of this pedal, and now I want to hear what it sounds like the other way around, and just be able to go click, click, and the results would be instantaneous. That would be pretty sweet. Would I get much use out of that? Not really. Not outside of, a couple videos every now and then. But if you make your living doing that, that'd be a pretty sweet system. For me personally, once I find an order, I'm probably going to stick with it. Or again, go back to digital modeling and just use presets there. If something like this ever saw the light of day, it'd probably look more like some products that have done something similar, like digital modelers where you can drag and drop effects to certain foot switches, like even the Pod HD 500 could do something like that. I believe I've seen one where you take like a little block that has like 3 or 4 controls on it, and then you put it in different positions on a pre-existing board. That's not bad. But if a company like Boss, who had a standard, even TC Electronic, that has a standard pedal size, could make a proprietary enclosure that wouldn't have to vary, since they have one size for that line of pedals at least, and then you do kind of that thing I was talking about, that'd be pretty sweet. Just being able to test a reverb before and after an amp in almost real time be pretty cool, I think. Certainly make pedal demos more interesting for me and maybe the 3 other YouTube channels that would actually adopt the thing in maybe 1 or 2 stores. So therein lies the problem. It's not going to reach a big audience, but a guy can dream. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this daydreaming session as much as I have. If you have any ideas yourself, please leave them down below. I'd like to hear them. I don't expect any of this stuff to be made realistically, except maybe concepts 1 or 2 someday, if they're not already being worked on in some capacity. I don't give a damn about credit for any of this stuff. It's not exactly original. It's just piecemealing different things that I would like to see in one part. So hopefully one day we'll see a few of these out there. Any other questions or comments, please leave them down below, and we will see you next time. Bye.